Give us this day our daily bread.
Behold the Lamb of God. Behold him who takes away the sins of the world.
Drew, what you doing? One of the things that all of us notice in our life is there's sometimes in our life where we just sense things aren't going right. We're not sick, we're not out of work, we're not broke. We just have a sense that something's not right. In fact, psychologists will say that in almost every depression that people experience, that there's always this dimension of the spiritual being a little out of whack and adding to the depression. And all of us have done that. And as a priest, for the 50 years I've been a priest, you know, when you talk to people, just having these conversations with people, you hear it. And people will come to the office and they'll talk, and most of the time they'll start by saying, I'm not exactly sure what I want to say. And then they keep talking, but what they want to say is something's just not right. Now, sometimes it's around them. Something's not right in their marriage, or something's not right with their boss at work. But it isn't just that. Sometimes it's just within them, something's not right. And that's where we have to start, because that's where God comes into the picture with a gift. And that gift is the gift of spirituality. He has built into us something in us that says, unless there's that openness to something bigger than us, someone bigger than us, unless we are in touch with that part of ourself, everything else can be okay, but it's not quite right. The spiritual life is the starting point for all of us, because it's very different from just morality. Morality is going to tell us, here's what's right, here's what's wrong, here's what we ought to do. Spirituality is the basis behind that. It says, here's the awareness of yourself and your awareness of others and your awareness of God, and that relationship you're starting to build, that loving relationship that says, yes, if I am in that relationship, this is the way I ought to live my life. But then it's seen as freeing. It's not seen as controlling. In fact, you know, with a lot of young people, they'll say, well, I don't want to go to church. You know, they just preach at you about morality. And I go to church and I'm bored. And part of the boredom is they don't have a spiritual life through the week to bring to the church. And if you don't have a spiritual life to bring to the church, if you don't bring anything, you're probably not going to get anything, as they put it. I didn't get anything out of it. And a lot of times, as parents or grandparents, or even brothers or sisters, we'll be in some discussion of, you know, why don't you go to church? And it becomes this kind of tense situation. Why don't you go to church? God wants you to go to church. And they say, you know, I don't get anything out of it. I'm spiritual, but I don't get anything out of it. Sometimes in our conversations with each other, especially with our kids and grandkids, that's the place to start. Not to get into this argument about, I go to church and you don't, and I want you to go to church and you don't want to go. No, what I want to do is I want to start at the common ground. All right, you tell me you're spiritual. Tell me about your spiritual life. What does your spiritual life look like? What are the dimensions of it? How do you see it? And oftentimes as they try to explain it to us, they either will surprise us by showing us they have much more of a spiritual life than we ever thought they did, or they'll surprise themselves. And as one young man said to me as he left a conversation with me, he said, well, you know, the one thing, Father, that I realized today is I don't have a spiritual life of any kind. And I think that kind of jarred him. I could tell the way he said it to me. It kind of just jarred him. Sometimes the reason that people don't develop a spiritual life is they think it's for monks, they think it's for cloistered nuns, they think it's for holy, pious kind of people. And that's not God's dream for us. God's dream is that every one of us would have that dimension of life that brings richness to everything else we do. It doesn't mean we give up our sports cars. It doesn't mean that we quit going to baseball games. It doesn't mean that we can't be fanatic about football. It doesn't mean that we don't want a nice house. It says that all of that stuff takes on more meaning when I develop the spiritual dimension of my life. St. Augustine said one time, our hearts are restless until they rest in you. And it wasn't just an insight that Augustine worded so well for us. That's the way we're made. We're made to be the kind of people who have these spiritual journeys going on in our life. So, what is that? What is a spiritual life? Well, the first thing is it's not going out there somewhere. It's not leaving the world. I know some of the old monks in the old days went and lived in the desert all their life. Well, if that's where they found God and found God in their prayer, that must have been a kind of a unique charism for them, a unique gift. But for most of us, where we're going to find God is washing dishes and changing diapers and running kids to soccer games and all the other things. The problem is, in all that running, we have to slow down enough and have that quiet pace where we really do have the time to find God and be reflective. When Jesus came, he said, the three dimensions of the spiritual life that are absolutely essential. And he said it answering that question of the young man who said, to kind of put him to the test, which is the first and the greatest of all of God's commandments? And he said, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, with all your being. And if we just stop there, because we usually go right to the second commandment. Now he said, let's just stop at the first one, that our life is going to be so much happier, deeper, richer, more meaningful if we really do give God our heart and our affections and our love. Our life is going to be so much richer if we give him our soul, if we let him into that inner room that Jesus talks about, that quiet space that is the deepest part of us. And all of us have experienced that. There are certain times when we slow down and when we are comfortable enough and quiet enough that inside of us we can say, I'm in touch with who I really am, the soul of who I am. If I can give that to my God, then there's a wonderful bond between the two of us. If I give him my whole mind, saying, I'm going to search for you. I'm going to search for your face. I want to know who you are. I want to know what you're like. And then with all our strength, that it's not something we just do on the periphery. This is something that is a major focus in our life, that I'm going to use my strength to build that deep, rich relationship with the one who is the source of all life. Then he says, but because the Pharisees wanted to just say, learn to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. But the second is just like it. The second is a companion to it. Love your neighbor as you love yourself. There's a spiritual writer, his name is Henry Nouwen. He's dead now, but he's written a lot of spiritual books and books on spirituality. And he takes those three journeys of love of God, love of neighbor, love of self, and he names them different ways. He names the love of God is from illusion, wrong images of God, to prayer. Love of others from hostility to hospitality. The third one, the love of self, from loneliness to solitude. And that's where we're going to start, because that's the most important one. You can say, but isn't the goal to learn to love God above all things? Isn't that the most important? Yes. Learning to love God and others is the goal, but the first rung on the ladder is learning to love ourselves. How do we do that? That may be the toughest of the three, but it's the basis for everything else, because if we don't do that, then we're still so self-conscious and self-centered, not self-centered in a sinful way of being selfish, but we're so self-conscious and self-centered of what do other people think of me, and how do other people see me, and how do other people think I look or act or whatever else. And until we can just be comfortable in our own skin, until we can love who we are, then we're not so preoccupied with ourselves, and we can really listen to and love other people, and we can really give ourselves to God. How does God do this? First, God wants us to recognize the uniqueness of each one of us. You know, you and I are all good at comparisons. I'm not as big as him. I'm not as good looking as her. I'm not as smart as him. I'm not as good at sports as he is. And we compare constantly. God doesn't like comparisons. God just says, think of your uniqueness. If you were the only person on the planet and you had nobody to compare yourself to, look at the beauty. Look at the beauty of your body, your hands, your eyes, the uniqueness of who you are as a person. And when we celebrate that uniqueness and start to believe that uniqueness, we realize two things. We realize I'm the only person who can give God me. I'm the only person who can give God this unique relationship that is me. Because if I'm unique in all the world, he might have a relationship with everyone else, and he doesn't love one more than the other. He loves each of us uniquely, but because we're unique, we're the only one who can give him me, us. And that's such a wonderful challenge, and the fact that he's waiting for that. The whole world might give him everything else, but he's still missing one thing if you don't give him you, because only you can do that. The other thing about the uniqueness is if God is light and love, and we are made an imago, a mirror, what it means is I'm a mirror. That's what the Latin word imago means, a mirror. God couldn't make another God. So what was the best thing he could make? A mirror. And the closer we get to the mirror, the more the mirror becomes us. And we become the mirror. And we reflect God to others. In our uniqueness, you and I, as individuals, are the only one in the world who can reflect that part of the diamond of God's life. We're the only one who can reflect that light. We're the only one who can show the world that aspect, because there's never been another you before, and there never will be again. They might look just like you, they might have the same color hair, but they won't have the same parents, they won't have the same brothers and sisters, they won't have the same experiences, they won't have the same history. There will never be another you. And he says, I need you to love you because I made you unique, and I made you for a deep, quiet self-respect. I want you to love my creation. Now, when we can't have a deep, quiet self-respect, we'll substitute. And the substitute is arrogance. You know, if I don't like all of me, well, then I'll just take a little part of me that I'm really proud of and be arrogant beyond belief about it, or cocky and proud about some aspect of my life. Now, the challenge, the journey is throughout our life to every year understand that uniqueness more, that specialness more, that we are a unique light to God, and that each one of us in our own way can only give him that gift. And once we do that, then we say, all right, that's who I am. That's the lifelong journey I'm going to give God. Why is this love of self so important? When we do love ourselves, we're not as self-centered and self-conscious. But the other is an example I use a lot when people come to me in reconciliation, and they'll say, Father, I was impatient with my wife, I was impatient with my kids, I was impatient with the people at work, I was impatient with everybody on the road, and I'll always stop them and say, how patient are you with you? And they look at me like, what? What's that got to do with it? I'll say, it has everything to do with it, because it's like the pot boiling over. If you got a pot boiling over on the kitchen stove, you're not going to run and get 2 cups and try to catch all the water and pour it back in the pot, because you know that doesn't work. That's just dumb. You get the pot off the stove, or you turn down the heat. Well, if I don't learn to be patient and loving of myself, and I'm impatient and judgmental and harsh with me, it boils over. And it boils over on all these people around me. And I blame all of them. They're the occasion, but I'm walking around with the gas can. I'm the one that's caused the explosion. They might have lit the match, but I had the gas can open walking around. Well, with the boiling pot, the more, if I learn gentleness, love of self, that boils over onto others. But if I learn harshness, judgment, criticism, and anger at myself, impatience with myself, it boils over. And most moms are kind of relieved when I just say to them, if you start today asking God to teach you to be as gentle with you as He is, I promise you, a year from today, you're going to be much more patient with your husband and your children. That's how important love of self really is. Let's come back to Father Henry Nouwen, who wrote those spiritual journeys and named them the way he did. Love of self, he says, is about moving from loneliness to solitude. Let's break that open. Loneliness is when I have to be alone and I don't enjoy my own company. I'm not comfortable in my own skin. Solitude is when I get to be alone and I do enjoy my own company and I'm comfortable with myself. That is a lifelong journey. And I'm sure many of you are sitting here saying, oh, I'm not very far along on that journey. That's why it's lifelong. Some days I think I'm going to have to live to 150 for God to get me where He needs me to be on this journey. But that journey of learning to love ourselves is such an important thing. What are some of the blocks to it? What keeps us from loving ourselves? One of the things, and we've reflected on this at other times, that love has 3 dimensions. And when we say, I really care about someone, I say I love them. When I really admire someone, I say I love them. When I really enjoy someone, I say I love them. But because we use the same word in English for describing all 3, we can get really good at one and not do the other. If we grow up in a family where our parents were really good at taking care of us, but they weren't so good at admiring us or letting us know that they did, or they weren't so good at enjoying us and spending the time with us and showing us that they enjoyed us, we remember that. And then we start doing the same with ourselves. We'll take good care of ourselves because whatever they did, we're going to do in spades. So when they took good care of us, now we'll take real good care of us. But if they didn't admire us, we won't either. If they didn't enjoy us, we won't either. And we could say, well, oh goodness, what kind of parent have I been? Or what kind of parents did I have? We're all sinful. None of us are where we ought to be. None of us do it correctly. But if we name it out loud and say, that does hurt us, that does cause some problems in our life, that's one. The other is, if we don't have that self-respect that we really need to have, we will always substitute something like it. You know, we're made to run on self-respect like a car is made to run on gas. You know, but if we don't get the self-respect, we'll get something that works. We'll pour some kind of gasoline or some kind of alcohol into there to go, and it'll go for a little while till it crashes, but it's a substitute. So when we use pride or arrogance as a substitute, it becomes our enemy, because then I can't accept any imperfections in me. I can't accept all the things that are wrong with me. My ears are too big. My ears were the same size when I was a little kid. When I weighed about 40 pounds in 4th grade, because I was always little and skinny, my ears were this big. And my older brother would tell me that the wind is going to come, and like Dumbo, I'm going to fly away. Well, those do wonderful things for your self-confidence and your ability to accept and like yourself. I was unique. Big ears. But with all of this, those things happen to all of us. But it isn't just the imperfections. One of the things that blocks us from loving ourselves is our own weaknesses and our own sins. And here we have to talk about the yes, but eraser. Every one of us owns a yes, but eraser. And what that is you give me a compliment. And instead of my saying, thank you, and maybe tonight going home and saying, you know, I hope she's right. I hope that is a quality that I have. Now, I get out my yes, but eraser and say, yes, but if she only knew how selfish I can be, if he only knew how I have mixed motivations and probably did this for the wrong reason, if they only knew that. So I take out my yes, but eraser and erase the compliment. And I'm still sitting there saying, but they don't see the sins. Well, the compliments help, but it really has to be something else. Because if someone can't forgive themselves, if they can't come to an appreciation of themselves, compliments are like throwing popcorn in the Grand Canyon. You can throw it in for the next 100 years. You're not going to fill up the Grand Canyon. It's still going to be there. That hole is still going to be empty. So what are the keys? The key to learning to love myself is forgiveness of myself. But there has to be a key to forgiving myself, because that's very difficult. And that key is compassion. Let's talk about that. All of us, when we were little kids, were told by our parents, quit feeling sorry for yourself. Quit feeling sorry for yourself. Go out and play. I don't want to see you crying. Just get over it. Go out and play. We're all told that. We're told, quit feeling sorry for yourself. And that's a good thing and a bad thing. Because when the little kid in us as an adult wallows around, woe is me, I got gypped, I got the short end of the stick, I didn't get what I needed in life, woe is me. That's self-pity. That doesn't help a thing. But compassion is the opposite. Compassion for self is when the adult in me has the ability to hear the sadness in my own story that I would have if I heard someone else's story. If someone came and told you your story, but it was somebody you were having coffee with, and they told you their story, but it was really your story, you might have a real compassion, not a pity for them, just a compassion, a sadness that they had to go through that. Well, that's true of every single one of us in this room. It's built into human life. All of us, every one of us in this room, has had times in life where there's been great loneliness. Married or single, great loneliness. There have been times in our lives where every one of us has been very misunderstood. There have been times in our life when every one of us have been left out. Those things hurt. And most of us have never told anybody about that. We just carry it. We just carry it all through our life. I've talked with people in my office who finally would share something that happened to them in second grade. The persons who did it to them, what they said, what they did out on the playground, they forgot the next day. That person has never forgotten it. And when they get back in touch with the pain, one young man who was about 35 just sat with me and just sobbed because of the deep pain he had carried all those years from that. He's not unique. All of us have that. All of us have had those kinds of very painful things because it's built into life. Life is difficult. What is compassion? Compassion for ourself is to say, I don't want to sit like a little kid in self-pity and woe is me. But as a quiet adult in my spiritual life, as I'm reflective, I want to just name and get in touch with all those things that have gone on that no one else knows. And I want, as I sit there, to say, you know, there are things in my life that are sinful, that are selfish, that are immature, that are broken. But you know, instead of me being angry with myself for not being my best self all the time, when I think about all the pain that's been part of my life, I ought to move over here and marvel that the good side of me is around it all. I could just be a mean, selfish, unfeeling, rotten person, and I'm not. I'm a good person. Yes, I sin. Yes, I have mixed motivations. Yes, I've got a side of me that's selfish. Yes, I can be petty or small. But can I forgive that? I can only forgive that when I have compassion for myself. Once we can forgive what's broken in us, then we're halfway home. But again, it takes a lifetime. That's a lifelong journey. There are other things that help along with forgiveness. Sometimes just having the gift of relationships, a good friend who loves us, warts and all, loves us with all of our problems and hang-ups. They know them, but they still love us. For those of you who are married, to have a spouse who knows you as well as your spouse knows you, and they know every fault you've got better than you do, and they love you anyway. Especially with little kids. I'm not sure I want to go into teenagers because they don't always love us, but little kids, they love us. And they look to us as a dad or a mom, and it helps us with our journey toward love of self, and especially if we live long enough to be gifted to be a grandparent. That as grandparents, when little grandkids just enjoy us to death, and we enjoy them to death and love them like crazy, and they're so glad to see us and come running, all those things are also very helpful on the journey of life. The last thing I want to say is just for those of us who are Catholic, the blessing of the sacrament of reconciliation. Because when we come in and very humbly and honestly say, here's the parts of my life that are all messed up. And our God, through that great prayer of forgiveness, is really saying to us, more even than the prayer says. He is saying, I've known you all your life. I've known you since you were a little bitty kid running around in short pants. I've watched you grow up. I've watched you as a teenager. I've watched you as an adult. And I see you here today, now, humbly, honestly admitting your sins. I admire you. I respect you. I appreciate you. I get a kick out of you. I enjoy your company. I am your friend. I am glad to forgive you. Once we experience that gentleness enough from God, then we can say, and I often ask people to do this for their penitential experience after reconciliation, just pray, God, teach me to be as gentle with me as you are with me. If we do that, maybe we're not there yet. I'm only 75 and I'll have to live a long time. But in that journey of learning to love ourselves, there will come a day when we see how unique we are, how special we are in the eyes of God, how much He loves us with our sinfulness, like a spouse does, and how much He celebrates His love for us. That's the first journey. It takes a long time, but we'll get there. Thank you.